Logan County, West Virginia, October 11, 1981. A logger named Clyde Miller was checking his trap lines at dawn when he found something that would keep him awake for the rest of his life. Harlon Boone's truck, door hanging open, keys still in the ignition, and 50 feet into the woods, Harlon himself, lying on his back with a single bullet through his chest, eyes open, staring at nothing. By noon that day, investigators would find 2 more bodies. By week's end, they discovered this wasn't random violence. This was execution. 14 men had planned it, coordinated it, carried it out with military precision, all because of 47 oak trees and a handshake that one man decided didn't matter anymore. But here's what makes this different from every other mountain feud you've heard about. When police surrounded the Atkins property 4 days later, expecting a standoff, maybe gunfire, they found Earl Atkins sitting on his porch waiting for them. His rifle leaning against the wall, unloaded, chamber open. 14 men lined up behind him, hands visible, ready to face what came next. Because this wasn't about escaping justice. This was about enforcing a code older than any law West Virginia had ever written. A code that said your word is sacred, your handshake is binding, and when you break that bond, there's a price. 3 families paid that price in blood. If you're ready to hear how honor becomes horror, how desperation turns good men into killers, stay with me. But I warn you, by the end of this story, you'll have to answer a question you've been avoiding your whole life. Earl Atkins was 52 years old in October 1981. 6'1", 210, with hands scarred from 30 years working underground in the coal mines and a reputation throughout Logan County as a man whose word was absolute. He'd inherited his father's Winchester Model 70 rifle and his grandfather's belief that once you shook a man's hand on a deal, that deal was done. No lawyers, no paperwork, just honor. He lived on 160 acres his family had held for 5 generations, raised 3 children with his wife Margaret. Everyone in the county knew that if Earl Atkins shook your hand, you could trust him completely. His son, Jesse, 28, worked as a coal truck driver, recently married to Linda, a school teacher from Charleston. Jesse was softer than his father, the kind of man who'd rather talk through problems than confront them. But he'd been raised in the old ways. He understood that in these mountains, reputation was everything. 3 miles down the valley lived the Boone family. Harlon Boone, 48 years old, was a logger and small farmer trying to hold on to land his grandfather had cleared in 1923. He had a wife, Ruby, 44 and 7 months pregnant with their 4th child. Their 3 kids, Tommy 12, Sarah 9, Michael 6, went to the same school where Jesse's wife Linda taught. Harlon drove a 1976 Ford F-250 with a cracked windshield, smoked Marlboro Reds, worked 18-hour days trying to keep his family fed. He was a good man by most measures. Helped neighbors with harvests, coached Little League, sang in the church choir. But in October 1981, Harlon Boone was desperate. The First National Bank of Logan had sent him a foreclosure notice on October 1st. $8,347.62 due by November 15th, or they'd take the farm. After 3 generations of Boones working that land, they'd lose it to Chase Manhattan Bank, over $8,000. The conflict started simple, the way most tragedies do. There was a 40-acre tract of ridgeland between the Atkins and Boone properties, prime white oak timber, old growth, worth serious money. The property line had been disputed since the 1950s, nobody quite sure where one family's land ended and the other's began. For 30 years, both families had just avoided it, left the trees alone, figured someday it would get sorted out legally. But in September 1981, with Harlon facing foreclosure and Earl concerned about his land rights, the dispute came to a head. They met at the Logan County Courthouse on September 18th with their respective families. Lawyers recommended they take it to court, estimated the legal battle would cost $15,000 and take 3 years. Neither family had that kind of money or time. So they did what mountain families had done for 2 centuries. They found a mediator they both trusted. Vernon Preacher Chafin, 76 years old, a retired coal miner who'd lost his left hand in a mine collapse in 1958 and now held Sunday services in his living room. Vernon was respected by everyone in Logan County. If Vernon said something was fair, people believed him. On September 23, 1981, under a clear autumn sky that smelled like wood smoke and changing leaves, the Atkins and Boone families met at Earl's property. 11 Boone men showed up. 8 Atkins men came. Vernon Chafin stood between them with his Bible in his one good hand. The agreement was simple. Nobody would cut timber on that disputed ridge for 5 years. In that time, they'd save money, hire a proper surveyor, get the property line legally established, and then whoever owned it could harvest the trees. Vernon read from Proverbs, "A good name is more desirable than great riches." Then he said what everyone in these mountains already knew. Your word is all you got. Everything else can be taken, but your word, that's yours to keep or yours to break, and every man here knows what it means to break it. Earl Atkins stepped forward first. He shook Harlon Boone's hand, firm grip, eye contact. Then Harlon's brothers, then the nephews and cousins. 23 handshakes total. It was 3:47 p.m. on September 23, 1981. The sun was starting to set behind the ridge, turning the oak leaves gold. Everything felt settled. Everything felt right. 23 days later, that handshake meant nothing to Harlon Boone. The bank didn't care about honor. The bank cared about $8,347.62. On October 1st, Harlon sat at his kitchen table staring at the foreclosure letter, doing math he'd done 100 times. 47 oak trees on that ridge. Mature timber, $200 to $250 per tree. That was $10,000, maybe more. Enough to clear the debt, enough to save the farm, enough to give his unborn child a home to grow up in. He looked at the ridge through his kitchen window. The trees were right there, just trees, just wood. And yes, he'd shaken Earl Atkins' hand. But Earl Atkins wasn't about to lose everything. Earl owned his land free and clear. Earl didn't know what it felt like to tell your pregnant wife you might have to move the family into a trailer park. So Harlon made a choice. He called his brother Floyd that night, told him they were cutting timber Friday morning. Floyd hesitated. What about the handshake? And Harlon said something he'd regret for the rest of his very short life. A handshake don't pay the bank. What Harlon Boone didn't understand was that in Logan County, among these particular families, a handshake wasn't just a gesture, it was law. It was religion. It was the thing that held civilization together when everything else failed. The sound of chainsaws echoed through the valley on October 9, 1981, at 6:47 a.m., mechanical screams cutting through morning fog. Earl Atkins heard those saws from 3 miles away and knew exactly what was happening. He didn't call the sheriff. He didn't call a lawyer. He called his family. By sundown on October 9th, 14 Atkins men had gathered in Earl's living room. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody had to. They all understood what had to be done. 23 handshakes had been made on September 23rd. By October 12th, 3 men would be dead because one of them decided his word didn't matter. On October 11th at 10:17 p.m., the Boone family hollow sat quiet under a half moon. Harlon's farmhouse glowed with yellow light from the kitchen window. Ruby was still awake, washing dishes, humming softly. In the trees above the hollow, 17 men moved without sound. Earl Atkins led them, his Winchester held low, his breath visible in the cold air. They divided into 3 groups, 6 men for each Boone household, 5 men for perimeter watch. This wasn't rage. This was execution of judgment. At 10:31 p.m., the knock came at Harlon's door. 3 solid raps, almost polite. Harlon opened it. Earl Atkins stood alone, no weapon visible, hands at his sides. "Earl," Harlon said carefully, "it's late." Earl looked at him with eyes that held no anger, just terrible sadness. "You broke the pact, Harlon. It wasn't a question. I had to. The bank, your word," Earl said quietly, "was supposed to mean something." Harlon saw movement in his peripheral vision, shadows detaching from trees, men stepping into moonlight with rifles. His breath caught. "Earl, we can..." You were given a choice, Earl interrupted. September 23rd, you shook my hand, you agreed, 5 years. Harlan's mind raced. Ruby was in the kitchen, the kids upstairs. Let me get my family out, he said, voice cracking. Please. Earl shook his head once. Your brothers, your nephews, every man who cut those trees. You've got 2 choices. Leave Logan County tonight, all of you, never come back. Or face what you brought on yourselves. We can't just leave. This is our home. Then you've made your choice. What happened in the next 90 minutes would leave 3 men dead, 6 families driven from their homes, and a community torn apart forever. Harlon Boone died at 11:29 p.m. in the woods behind his farm. A single shot from Earl's Winchester. His brothers Jesse Dale and Raymond Thomas died defending their trailer 2 miles away, caught in a crossfire of 23 rounds that turned aluminum walls into Swiss cheese. When police arrived on October 12th, they found Amanda Boone, Jesse Dale's wife, alive in a bathtub with her baby daughter, somehow untouched. She identified every shooter. On October 14th at 6 a.m., law enforcement surrounded Earl's farm expecting a firefight. What they found was Earl sitting on his porch, his rifle unloaded, waiting. I know what I'm under arrest for, he said quietly, turning to put his hands behind his back. We're not going to make this difficult, Sheriff Clayton Atkins, Earl's second cousin, asked him as he tightened the handcuffs. What the hell were you thinking? Earl looked at him with those same sad eyes. I was thinking that a man's word used to mean something in these mountains. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe those days are gone. 3 men are dead, Earl. Was it worth it? Earl didn't answer until they reached the police car. Then he stopped, looked back at his land, at the mountains where 5 generations of Atkins had lived. Ask me again in 20 years. If these mountains forget what we did here, if a man's word doesn't mean nothing anymore, then no, it wasn't worth it. But if people remember that some things are still sacred, he shook his head, then maybe it was. Earl Atkins received 3 consecutive life sentences. He died in prison in 2003 at 74 years old. His last words, tell Jesse I'm sorry I couldn't teach him better. Ruby Boone raised her 4 children alone, cleaning houses, never leaving Logan County. Her daughter Hope, born 2 months after Harlan's murder, became a public defender. When asked why in a 2018 interview, she said, because my father died in a system that failed everyone involved. I became a lawyer, so maybe someone else's father wouldn't have to die over trees and pride. 43 years have passed. The hollow where Harlan died is empty now, his farmhouse torn down in 1995. The ridge where 47 oak trees were cut has regrown, white oak saplings now 30 feet tall. There's no memorial, no historical marker, no acknowledgement that anything happened there at all. Silence covers everything the way it always does in these mountains. But the question remains, what would you do if someone broke a sacred promise to you? How far would you go to protect what you believed was right? Earl Atkins was a murderer, that's fact. But Earl Atkins was also a man who believed his word meant something, that honor wasn't abstract but a living code that held communities together. Both things can be true. That's what makes this story so disturbing. We want clear villains and obvious victims. But life rarely offers that clarity. When your family is losing everything, when the system offers no help, when the person who wronged you faces no consequences, are you absolutely certain you'd choose differently? The uncomfortable truth is that monsters aren't born, they're created. One financial pressure at a time, one humiliation, one moment of choosing pride over compassion. Earl Atkins didn't wake up one day and decide to become a killer. He made small choices, each one leading to the next, each feeling justified until he crossed a line he could never uncross.